curious, adventurous, self-aware.
Hi out there, this is Heather Vickery. Thanks so much for tuning in to this week's episode of the Brave Files podcast. Have you ever wanted to be anything other than yourself? Have you hidden who you are in order to fit in or feel safe? I know many people who have experienced this, including me. I wonder, have you ever known or loved someone who experienced those things? How did it affect you? How did it alter you and change your life? Well, today's guest, Miranda Kossoff, knows about this firsthand. She grew up in a household filled with hidden truths and confusion. Born the daughter of an American Jew turned Southern Baptist who fought in World War II, Miranda never really knew her father, and she suspects he didn't know himself very well either. We unpack all of this in this conversation. Miranda, who is the oldest of four, found herself raising her siblings and taking care of her parents instead of the other way around. Sadly, her father took his own life and left many, many unanswered questions. In an effort to learn more about her father and herself, Miranda began researching her father and has turned that into a brand new, wonderful book called The Rope of Life. This is a beautiful and heartbreaking story of survival, loneliness, and trying to understand one's family in order to understand oneself. Please know that we do talk about mental health issues and suicide in this episode. Know your own triggers and decide for yourself if this is an episode that is safe for you to listen to. It is an incredible conversation, and I'm really honored to be able to share it with you. If you or someone you know is considering suicide, please know that you are not alone. Contact the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline right now. They are available 24/7 at 1-800-273-8255. Now let's meet Miranda Kossoff. This is Heather Vickery, and you're listening to The Brave Files, stories from people living courageously. When we choose bravely in big and small ways, it powerfully elevates our lives. I hope these stories connect with you and encourage you to embrace bravery in every possible way, day after day. Together, we can build a movement of courageous living that enriches both our lives and our communities. And if you enjoy the show, I ask you to please share it with others. Maybe think of someone who you want to choose bravely right alongside you. Thanks for tuning in. Now here's the show. Imagine feeling as if your late father's story was calling to you, essentially from the grave, that knowing if you didn't tell his story, something inside of you might just break. That's what today's guest, Miranda Kossoff, experienced. Miranda says, I felt it was my life's purpose to write this book as a beacon for others who've experienced racism, antisemitism, and being marginalized for who you are. The book, The Rope of Life, is out now, and Miranda is here to share her journey with us. Welcome to the Brave Files.
Thank you so much, Heather. I'm delighted to be with you.
I am too, and I have a copy of your book here, and it is such a beautiful, poignant story. Thank you for putting this out into the world. Oh,
I'm so grateful for my readers and people who've given me such wonderful feedback on the book.
Yeah. So your father was a Jew from New York who converted to Christianity, specifically becoming a Southern Baptist. That's a big difference. In order to marry your mother. This is a really fascinating story, but I want to make sure we're talking about you and your journey in this process. I am curious, how much of that did you know about growing up, and did it impact your childhood at all?
I didn't know much about it until I was in my around 10 or 11, mainly because my Jewish grandparents visited at least once a year. And I adored my Jewish grandfather, who in many ways made me who I am. With just the little amount of time that he and I spent together, it had a huge impact on me. So I knew my father had converted actually during World War II. He was a top turret gunner and flight engineer in a B-17. And on one mission, he loved to tell stories about the war. And he told me this because I was curious about when he quote, accepted Jesus as his Savior, unquote, which is what we learned in Sunday school and being Southern Baptist. And he said it was when the plane was riddled with bullets from a dogfight with Messerschmitts. And he prayed to God that if God got him and the crew safely back to base, that he would become a Christian.
Oh, wow.
And of course, he knew my mother before he shipped out for the war. And he'd been exposed to Southern Baptism because he'd gone to church with my mother. And he asked her to marry him before he left, but she said, "No, I don't want to be a war widow." So anyway, so in his mind, he had already converted before he came back alive, fortunately. And they married in 1945, and he was already a Southern Baptist by then.
Wow.
Yeah.
I find that really fascinating. And you said something that I don't hear very often, is that he loved to tell stories of the war. That is not common among
Correct.
veterans, especially from what I understand, World War II veterans. Why do you think that was different for him? Obviously, it's speculation and you don't probably know, but why do you think that was different for him?
Right. I know it was unusual. I think for him, well, he was 19 when he enlisted, that experience was the most intense. And I mean, the camaraderie with the other crew, because your lives are in each other's hands, and so crucial to who he became, that he couldn't help but talk about it. And the interesting thing is, he wouldn't talk about his childhood or growing up. He never talked about a feeling. He wouldn't know a feeling if he stepped on one. But there must have been so much fear and exhilaration and these very intense emotions involved in his wartime experience that they just lived in him. And he had to talk about it, I guess. And when he did, it was, I got caught up in the bravery and the fear of it all. I mean, I could visualize it as he talked about it. So he was one of the rare ones, but I'm fortunate that he was willing to talk about it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Do you believe that there was any, I don't know how I want to ask this question, prior to converting, but even then, so much of Judaism is culture, not necessarily religion, about being Jewish during the Holocaust and serving in the war. I just wonder if he ever shared any experience, like what that might have felt like for him.
He didn't talk about that. My grandparents were basically, they were observant maybe for Passover or Hanukkah, but they weren't very religious Jews. They were secular Jews.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's what I mean. It's really a culture.
It is. It's a cultural thing. And he didn't mention that, but you would think that, dropping bombs on towns in Germany and knowing, well, they didn't know the extent at that point to which the Nazis were systematically murdering Jews, but they knew enough about what Hitler's ideology was that it was extremely anti-Semitic. My father must have had a tangle of feelings about that. And one of my theories, and this is only a theory and it could be completely off base, is that he converted because he saw what damage had been done to people like him. And he didn't want to be with that oppressed group. But the fact of the matter is, he could never not be a Jew.
That's right.
You can't just turn it off and say, okay, I'm a Southern Baptist now. And because in a small Southern Jim Crow town where we grew up, he was talked about by some as that Yankee Jew. And so it's not something you can change with a flick of the switch.
Yeah, absolutely. How did, if at all, that fact affect you growing up?
Good question. The anti-Semitism that I experienced was very, very subtle. Southerners always want to make nice. And,
Well, bless your heart.
That's right. And y'all come see us now. If you showed up at their front door, they would faint. But
well, and bless your heart is not a nice thing. When they're saying that, that's coded language right there.
That's coded. Yeah, it is. Exactly. But I remember being asked in Baptist Sunday school to explain the Jewish holidays to the other students or the other kids. And I said, well, I don't know. I'm Baptist like you. And it had the effect of marginalizing me, I have to say. And there were other instances where I was considered somewhat different. And people would ask when they'd meet us, Kossoff, that's an unusual name. Where are y'all from? Mm-hmm. And I would say, well, I'm from here, just like you. But I wasn't like them. There was something that set me apart because of who my father was. And so, I did experience that. And I eventually became very withdrawn and shy and kept to myself a lot. And I think that's probably how people who went to high school remember me, as being shy. But there was a raucous girl inside me. She just didn't get a chance to get out and play.
I mean, being othered will do that, right? We have to curl up. I'm LGBTQ, right? So we have to know when we're safe and when we're not. And being othered can really dictate how you behave in your life.
Absolutely.
And that question, goodness, I mean, this is a different generation where people were, oh, where are y'all from? But I've seen that recently. I've known family members who will say, oh, that foreign girl or this whatever, because, they're South Asian or because their last name looks different. And I'm like, why are we still having this conversation in the 21st century? Because somebody's got a different last name. Where was your father's family from originally?
Russia. My grandfather emigrated as a boy, and they lived on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. They came through Canada. And his father, my great-grandfather, was a tailor, kind of typical Jewish immigrant experience.
Yeah.
But my grandfather then departed from that and became a pianist. And he gave concerts and he taught, and classical music was his passion. And he was a self-educated man. He could speak 4 languages fluently and traveled in Europe and was at home. He was more at home in Europe than he was, I think, in the U.S. And he dressed that way, too. He had a European flair. He wore cravats.
I love that.
Yeah.
And you were close to your dad's parents?
Yes. I'm one of 4. I'm the eldest of 4. And I was the only one who was close to them. And I think part of it was that my grandfather lavished the most attention on me, and perhaps he saw potential in me. But, I just lapped up his stories of traveling in Europe, and especially France. France was one of his favorite countries.
Me too.
Yeah. Well, I've been there. I've been to France probably a dozen times. And my son, majored in French. And I don't know that my son has ever acknowledged that maybe I was, somehow unconsciously, he was influenced by me and my love of France. And my speaking, I have sort of a preschooler vocabulary, French vocabulary.
That's funny. I love that. What kind of potential do you think he saw in you?
I think, well, I looked a lot like the Jewish side of my family. I think because I was a curious child, I wanted to know everything. I started reading early, and I was a great audience for him. And I think he must have felt I was more like the Jewish side of my family in subtle ways. And that's proved true over the years. I'm the only one of the four of us who has a lot of Jewish friends. I even went to synagogue for a while to decide whether that was something I wanted to do.
You were thinking about converting.
Yeah. But in the end, I'm just, organized religion is not, it's not my bag.
I feel that. I feel that. Have you brought any, because we did talk about the fact that so much of Judaism is culture versus, I mean, obviously there is organized religion, but I also have a ton of Jewish friends, and I love so many of the Jewish cultural events. Have you brought any of those into your family?
No, I haven't, though I certainly talked to my sons about, I think we did Hanukkah a couple of years. Well, they really loved Hanukkah because, boy,
9 days of presents.
More gifts,
Yeah.
and plus Christmas. What a bonanza. So after a couple of years of that, I thought, no, they're just seeing it as, they don't see the import of this. They're not really grasping what Hanukkah means in Judaism. They just were in it for the gifts. So I didn't carry on that tradition. But they knew how I identified with the Jewish side of my family. And I told them stories about my grandfather, and of course also stories about my father who they never met.
Right. And that's because your father died by suicide.
Right.
How old were you when
I
that happened?
I was 32, and my sons were, I guess they were about 18 months old, or maybe less. And my dad had always, well, he loved to fish, to hunt and fish. He was kind of an outlier in his family because of the things he liked to do. He sort of fled from the cultural, intellectual part of his upbringing and liked to hang out with working people. He was a dentist, so he had gone through undergraduate and dental school on the GI Bill, but he was plenty smart. I thought my father was extremely bright, and yet he chose to socialize with men who had little to no education, what we would call good old boys. And he picked up tobacco chewing and some other nasty habits. But he was, in some ways that's admirable because he was egalitarian. He didn't see class. He didn't see rank. He didn't see any of that. And then a secondary motive might have been that he felt very comfortable and not judged by these people, because once he adopted some of their habits and customs, they embraced him as a fellow hunter. And he didn't socialize with the business and professional class as much as one would have thought. So that's interesting too. I mean, that's maybe what marginalization causes in one's choice of friendships or the people you want to hang out with.
Absolutely. How did your father's death affect you?
I was gutted. I didn't think I would be because I knew he was suicidal. In fact, he was on 24-hour suicide watch at the University of Virginia Hospital. And he had suffered a long decline. First, it was back surgery. I mean, that's a occupational hazard for dentists, is bad backs.
Right.
And he had a couple of surgeries and then chronic back pain. And then instead of living with it and finding ways to cope, he let it sideline him from life. He took to his bed. And my theory had always been that it was just as much his emotional and mental state as it was the pain that caused him to withdraw from the world and focus on the pain as the reason instead of looking at his own emotions and what was going through him. And we thought he was safe on 24-hour suicide watch at UVA Hospital. And so that was the shocker, to get the call that he had killed himself in the hospital.
Oh, wow. Gosh, I can't even imagine how that happens.
Do you want to know?
Do you want to share?
No, I don't mind sharing at all.
Okay, so just for those listening, this is what we're going to talk about. And if this is something you don't want to hear, you can fast forward a few minutes. We totally understand. Okay.
Yeah. I want to preface this by saying that my father was an incredibly ingenious man. And if he set his mind to something, he accomplished it. And I thought he could move mountains, literally, because whatever he said he was going to do, it became reality. And so he found a way. He took the tie from his bathrobe and looped it around the hook for the bathrobe that was on the bathroom door, and tied the other end around his neck and just slumped against it. It wasn't like he was stepping off a chair or anything. So at any time, he could have simply stopped, gotten to his knees, taken it off. So that is what really unhinged me. The thought that he had no self-preservation instincts. Like, you would think your instinct to live, to survive would kick in, and you might think, oh, no, I can't do this to myself. But he was so determined that that's what did it.
Wow. That is, in fact, devastating. And also, I'm sure you wish you had some knowledge. I mean, it just sounds like there were internal terrors that he just didn't want to live with. But we don't, it's speculation, of course.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And I talked to his psychiatrist after his death, and the psychiatrist told me that he was one of the few, if the only patient, that he had never been able to get even to the tip of his pain, his emotional pain, and the depths of his sadness, that he was just so sealed off from himself and from anybody who wanted to help him. And so I think there must have been, what made me so sad is that he was alone with all of these awful thoughts and feelings, and perhaps, World War II, I think veterans of World War II also suffered from post-traumatic stress.
Absolutely.
Syndrome, but it was not understood then and never acknowledged. And so it was a Gordian knot, I think, with my father, with so many threads rejecting your heritage and what you grew up with, seeing the devastation in World War II, being marginalized in the town that you adopted, and he even had a nose job.
Wow. To look less Jewish.
Yep. And
wow.
he was handsome. He was really movie star handsome, and his long nose was part of his good looks. It wasn't outsized or anyway. I didn't like it. I didn't know how to relate to him when he came back. He went to New York and had a second cousin do the surgery, and we weren't told that's what he was going to have done. We were just told it was something to clear a deviated septum because he snored a lot. And then he comes back and he looks like a totally different person. And I didn't know how to relate to that person for a while. It took me some time to warm up to him.
Well, I can't imagine what kind of impact. You have all sisters, right? 4 girls?
2 sisters and a brother.
2 sisters and a brother. I have 4 girls, so it's interesting. But I can't imagine what that might do to your own self-esteem to see your father want to physically change his appearance to hide who he is. Did that have any impact on you? Or maybe you wouldn't have known at the time, but as you reflect, do you think it had any impact on you?
That's a really good insight. I never thought about it that way, but I was certainly obsessed with having, as I got older, having the right clothes. My hair was dark and somewhat curly, and I wanted the straight hair, and I envied blonde Joan Garrett, who had teeth like chiclets. They were just square white teeth, and she was the head cheerleader. And I just wanted blonde hair. And when I was a young girl, I would dig my mother's half slip out of her drawer and put it around my head and pretend that I had long blonde hair.
Oh, wow.
I would dance around with that half slip on my head, and so.
I mean, and part of that could stem from just having been othered, but I wonder if there's something sort of unspoken that passes when you see a parent. I mean, I know firsthand that the way I see myself or talk about myself affects how my children see themselves.
Yes.
Because we've had that conversation, and the same for me and, my mother. And so I have to imagine on some level, you were picking up on that.
Oh, how could it be otherwise?
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah.
Because he was the most important person in my life. I idolized him.
Were you close to your dad and your mom, your parents? Were you close to your parents?
Not really. Neither one was demonstrative and allowed you to get emotionally close. I think that's why they were a good fit for each other, because neither would challenge the other about, how do you feel about this? And so I don't remember ever being told I love you by either of my parents. Dad was the fun guy who, not a mushroom, but the guy who let me ride on his shoulders at the Outer Banks, riding the swells of the waves. And he played checkers with me. And he had a Jeep at one point, and he made a train of sleds during the snow, and all of us neighborhood kids hooked our sleds together, and he towed us around the neighborhood. And my mother, the only thing I ever remember doing with my mother was she had her Thursday was her shopping day in town, and occasionally, if I begged enough, she would take me. But there wasn't any sharing of ideas or much of anything. In some ways, I raised myself being the eldest, and I know that my mother especially, was distracted with the subsequent children, only one other of which was planned and two were unplanned. And one of those was my father's longed for son. So when that son came along, man, I was really put on the back of the shelf. Make me think of Elf on a Shelf. But
that's so hard to hear. That must be so heartbreaking.
Well, it was, but when I was going through it, you tend to blame yourself. Kids blame themselves.
Of course, yeah.
For what their parents do. And I thought, well, I'm just not pretty enough. I'm just not interesting enough. If I was just more of this, more of that, maybe Dad would pay more attention to me. But, he had a son to take hunting and, to put all his hopes in for becoming a dentist.
Have you been able to move past those feelings? I'm not pretty enough. I'm not smart enough. I'm not interesting enough.
That's an excellent question. I have struggled with those feelings my whole life. Even though intellectually I know that I'm probably much better than that. And, the jobs that I've had, the accolades, but it all seemed like it went into this black hole, the black hole of need. No matter how many compliments you get, you don't take it in. It just goes into the black hole. So, yeah.
My heart. Is that still where they go?
I try to reroute them these days.
Good for you.
Especially at my age when things are fewer and farther between, except for the reaction to my book, which I was overwhelmed by the great reactions. I was terrified that because I was spilling some secrets of the town where I grew up and some family secrets, that there would be a lot of blowback. And people contacted me, even younger people. There's a guy who's young enough to be my son who now contacts me regularly. He said he could so identify with that book. He grew up in Danville. And we just get on really well. And he said, I wish I had a cool mother like you, because his mother and I are the same age. And I said, well, I'll just adopt you. And then I had, some college students doing reviews of my book. I think in a couple of instances they were assigned, but I know at UNC there were a couple of Jewish students read the book, and one wrote about it for the Daily Tar Heel, which is a pretty well-read, even though it's a student paper, it's a very good student paper, and it's well-read in this area. So all of those things have made me feel better about myself as a writer and have certainly spurred me to go on with the second book. So, yeah, I've taken that in and I feel good about it.
I'm glad to hear that. I'd love to know how you reroute it. What do you actively do to reroute that?
Well, I have conversations with myself. Like,
yes, yeah.
Look at what this person said about your book. And this person, of course, my friends are going to give me good reviews. But these were strangers. These were people. And I got a couple of new women friends who read the book and reached out to me. And I said, look at this. This is because of what you wrote and how relatable it was and how people feel free to express things that they went through and to talk to me about it. So yeah, I just repeat it to myself and give myself a little pat on the back every now and then.
I love that. I love that. In the afterword of your book, and if it's all right with you, I'm going to read a quote.
Sure.
I have a question. You say, my goal was to understand my father, why he was sometimes cruel, what drove him to suicide, did he love me, who was he? I didn't find answers to those questions. Instead, I learned things about myself that years of psychotherapy, though important, had not revealed. I'd love to know what you learned about yourself in the process. It took you 20 years to write this book.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I wasn't writing for 20 years. I started, and a chapter was published in a book of essays, book of women's essays, and somehow my youngest sister found out about it, and there was a lot of pushback from her. So I just dropped it because I thought this is going to upset the family. But at the 20-year mark, the voice inside me got so insistent, and I started to listen to these voices inside me because not listening to them in the past has gotten me into a lot of trouble. So yeah, I finally listened to the voice, and I went back to the few chapters I'd written, and I just started building on that and built it out. What I learned about myself was I learned that I probably struggled with depression even as a teenager. And that was part and parcel of the marginalization and not being told that I was good at anything. And I was. I made straight A's. In those days, of course, you weren't taken to all these activities where you could take ballet or whatever. But I did take piano lessons for a while, and I was quite good at that. But I was never praised. And I realized that those things, plus my inherited tendency toward depression,
Right.
because my Jewish grandmother, had severe clinical depression and had electroshock therapy to bring her out of it.
Wow.
So I learned that I was depressed, and not to blame myself for things that, given the untreated depression, I wouldn't have been able to do, in high school. Like put myself out there. I never dated. I didn't know how to relate to a boy. So there was that. And I guess I realized a lot of influences that made me who I am as a person, kind of a deep core of me, and where that came from, and why it's so important to me, and to appreciate those things in me that I had never really acknowledged and appreciated, which is my intellect, my desire for lifelong learning. I have taken up so many things as an adult, things that my parents wouldn't pay for or take me to. I gave myself all kinds of classes, and I became a metalsmith, and I did mixed media collage on the side. This was all while working a professional job. And that I just have this intellect that needs feeding. And I've also realized, because of that, why some people as friends they can't relate to me as much. And they may be, it never occurred to me that some people might be intimidated by me. But a couple of people have told me that. And it's not anything I necessarily do. It's just that I own myself.
Good for you.
I'm no shrinking violet anymore. And yeah, so I've been able to let go of those so-called friendships where, I end up taking care of people rather than have a friendship between equals. So anyway, that's a long, rambling answer to your question about
That's okay.
About what I learned about myself.
But I love that, and that loving yourself enough and trusting yourself enough. I think that speaks to all of the other things that we've talked about today, and I think it's a really lovely gift for you to pass down to your own children. Hopefully, they're seeing this and not then having the same experience you had as a child or a young adult. I believe your children are adults at this point.
Oh yeah, they're 42 twins.
I would love this feels like it. I love this question. I ask it every interview, and it is both a wonderful time to ask it and also maybe a little awkward. But you've just said all of these things that you've learned about yourself and learning to accept compliments and talk yourself out of feeling bad when something good happens. So how do you celebrate when the book was released, when you're getting good responses, or even just when you catch yourself being kind to yourself and showing yourself love? How do you celebrate?
I eat chocolate.
I do too. I love that.
And yeah, I probably need to do more of that in a more intentional fashion. Shopping has always been my go-to feel-good, empowering thing. And the flip side of that is it's bad to have that addiction. I have no other addictions, maybe chocolate, but shopping has been an addiction. And if I accomplish something, I'm going to reward myself. I'm going to buy a new top, or I'm going to go shopping and find myself something pretty. I think I can do better. I have so much now that now I'm at the stage of trying to get rid of stuff instead of adding to the all the things I've amassed. And more lately, it's been buying art because that's something I live with and can see on my walls every day that I appreciate and that makes me feel good and is timeless. So I have invested in not hugely expensive pieces of art or not nationally known artists, but we have some great local artists who should be celebrated, and I've supported them. So I guess, in the end, that's probably more what I do.
Yeah.
Or I go to the gallery. I used to belong to an art gallery, a plug for Frank Gallery in Chapel Hill. Mm-hmm. I was a member because I was juried in for the jewelry that I started making on the side, and it's a very high upscale gallery in the sense that the art is top notch. Some galleries you go in and it's somebody's hobby that's on the wall. The people who show at Frank are professional artists, and that's how they make their living. And it can be pottery. So a lot of times I'll just go and hang out at Frank Gallery because my friends are there. I'm not a member anymore because I had to stop making jewelry because of neck and shoulder issues. But I do have a few pieces on consignment that I still now and then cobble together some bits and pieces I have left over from my metalsmithing days. And
nice.
So I go to Frank and I just hang out and look at the gorgeous art on the walls and talk to my friends, because usually one or two of them will be in the gallery at any given time. And that really lifts me up.
Yeah, that's a lovely way to celebrate. And it's bringing others into it. It's creating community and connection. That's beautiful. Mm-hmm. I love that. Thank you for sharing that with us. Miranda, what is your favorite charitable organization to support?
Oh, I have so many.
Me too. But pick one, your favorite today.
I guess first in my heart, because it's so personal, would be the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. Because one of my sons, was diagnosed with chronic myelogenous leukemia when he was 21.
Wow.
And I used to be a team leader on these, they have these Light the Night walks for the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society and as a fundraiser. And I used to lead a team on a Light the Night walk, and I've done the neighborhood fundraisers. And that organization was so helpful to my son. And I will say my son is now 42, so he's been in remission.
Wonderful.
Remission for 20 years, thanks to this drug that was developed by a doctor named Brian Drucker and others, but primarily Brian Drucker, with support from the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. So I credit them for helping save my son's life and providing resources when he was really sick. So I'd have to say that is the closest to my heart.
It's an incredible organization to support, and I'm so thrilled to hear that your son is in full recovery. You know, that it's been many, many years. Cancer's a beast. It's something that touches all of our lives. So thank you. They will be our charity of the week. We'll give them lots of extra love, folks. Like I ask you every week, subscribe, rate, review, listen, support, give money if you can, donate time, whatever it is that you can do for these organizations. We're called on, as a global community of people to lift one another up, to support one another. So thank you for that. Miranda, where can people learn more about you, connect with you, learn about your new book you have coming out, get a copy of The Rope of Life?
Oh, thank you for asking that. I would love for people to visit my website. It's just mirindakossoff.com. And the spelling, I think they'll see.
Yes.
You'll give them the spelling.
We'll put links in the show notes.
I write a blog also, so there are blogs up there that I think can be helpful to some people. One is about depression, and a lot of resources for writers there. So anyway, I'll stop now because I know.
It's okay. Thank you for that. Yeah, great resource. I really appreciate this conversation and the book that you've put out there, and the fact that you're having these deep conversations out in public when we're talking about depression, we're talking about racism and anti-Semitism and being marginalized, being alone, feeling less than. Those are things that so many people experience. And you are so gently but openly putting these things out into the world and taking away the stigma of them. So thank you for all that you do.
And thank you for all that you do, too.
Awesome. All right, folks, I am so glad that you were here with us today. If you enjoy the show, do me a favor, subscribe, rate, and review, especially that review part, because it's really fun for me to hear what you think of the show. It really just makes my day to see that you have taken the time to rate and review the show. And if you love the Brave Files, then you're also going to love my new podcast, Was It Chance? It's the podcast about embracing opportunity and taking intentional risks for your creative life. You can listen wherever you enjoy podcasts, wherever you're listening to this one, or visit wasitchance.com. And you can follow both the Brave Files podcast and Was It Chance on Instagram. Let us know what you think about the shows by sending DMs. We always love to hear from you, and we promise to respond personally and directly. Thank you for being here. I'll talk to you next week. This is Heather Vickery reminding you today and every single day to go out and choose bravely. Hey friends, I want to share something really exciting with you. We already know you enjoy listening to podcasts because you're listening to this one, but I'm also betting you enjoy audiobooks. And hey, listen, if you don't already enjoy audiobooks, then it's time to check them out. That's why I'm really excited to share Libro.fm with you. They are an incredible new platform for listening to audiobooks. And by choosing Libro.fm over other audiobook services, you are supporting a local bookstore of your choice and investing in your local community. Libro.fm offers over 150,000 audiobooks via their primary platform, which, by the way, they built with love and from scratch because they're a small business also. They even offer bookseller recommendations for great audiobook options. You can sign up right now via www.vickeryandco.com/LibroFM. That's vickeryandco.com/LIBROFM. And when you do, you'll get one free audiobook of your choice, and the proceeds will go to your favorite local bookstore. Now, check what I just said there. You're going to get a free book, and the proceeds are still going to go to your local bookstore because Libro.fm makes sure that their booksellers get paid even when they give a promo to customers. I've listened to over 20 audiobooks this year alone. I especially love listening to memoirs read by the author, and it feels great knowing that all of my purchases support my local bookstore, The Book Table, in Oak Park, Illinois. Libro.fm. The same audiobooks, the same price, but a completely different story. Check them out right now at vickeryandco.com/LibroFM. Have you ever thought about starting a podcast? Maybe you've had this thought and then quickly shut it down because who has the time? Or you don't know how, or gosh, it just all seems too hard. If you have something to share with the world, we want to encourage you to get your message out. The world needs to hear it. Did you know that 50% of all homes are podcast fans? If you've ever wondered about having your own podcast or how it can increase your business or get your message across, then please join me and the other experts from the Podcast Power Academy for our monthly free Q&A session. It's called So You Want to Start a Podcast? This casual live conversation will help you understand how podcasting can be a great decision, why now is the best time to get started, and how to get into action with it. Visit podcastpoweracademy.com to learn more. You've been listening to The Brave Files, stories of people living courageously. To learn more about the show, find our show notes and full episode transcripts, or to get some great bonus content, visit thebravefilespodcast.com. And we would love to know what you think of the show. You can give us a call at 312-646-0205. Let us know your thoughts on the episode, the show in general, or maybe share with us how you're out choosing bravely. This episode is brought to you by Vickery & Co. Success Coaching. Coaching that helps you maintain a life well lived and a business well run. Learn more at vickeryandco.com. Our music was created and produced in a custom collaboration with Matt Lewis from ML Creative Consulting, a boutique firm dedicated to helping clients identify their unique sound and amplify their brand with custom delivered soundtracks. We couldn't do any of this without our extraordinary audio engineer, Andrew Olson. Learn more about him and check out his work at findandrewolson.com. And special thanks to everyone on Team Brave, from our producers, associate producers, copy editors, writers, and support team. Special thanks to Molly, Mary, Kim, Sabra, and Sabrina. I'm your host and executive producer, Heather Vickery. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll talk to you next week.